Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, Season 5, Episode 39. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. I watched Tucker Carlson's new docuseries on the September 11th attacks, and although I want you, dear listener, to go out and watch the same, there are a few details in the first episode that are worth mentioning here on the podcast, and in fact, support some of the conspiracy theories that I have poo-pooed, that I have naysayed over the now close to 25 years. And a belated segment on the Tennessee Volunteers football team. I haven't had a chance to discuss the heart-wrenching loss against the Georgia Bulldogs and the fact that the Tennessee defense, at least for the first 4 weeks of the season, fucking sucks. Thank you to all my dedicated listeners. If you're new to this podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Please consider supporting.
Act 1 9/11 conspiracy theories were right and wrong.
Tucker Carlson has his own YouTube channel, his own media outlet now, and he has a series that's coming out about the September 11th attacks, and in promotional material purports to uncover the cover-up that the Bush administration had with regard to the September 11th attacks. I've watched the first episode of this series, and I was quite impressed. I do not consider Tucker Carlson a journalist. I have always viewed him as much more of a pundit, but I believe that because of his media presence, he's like a Glenn Greenwald. And if you don't know who Glenn Greenwald is, he's the guy who basically broke the story of NSA spying on American citizens. That source was Edward Snowden. Snowden went to Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald, whatever you may think of him, is an investigative journalist. He has a presence in the news media landscape as an investigative journalist. If people want to break a story and people are worried about whether or not someone's going to publish it, you go to the likes of a Glenn Greenwald, who A, has the integrity, and B, has the presence. They're going to publish the story. I don't put Tucker Carlson into that same category or that same box, but then given the access that he can garner to information simply by way of his media presence, it's not implausible that he can go out and obtain information, that he can go out and cultivate sources similar to any other investigative journalist. I personally have disagreed vehemently with some of the things that Tucker Carlson has said, some of his political, his social positions. But he is a creature of the media. He knows how to put together a story. He knows how to communicate. So I figured that this story, at least for the first episode, would be worth watching to determine whether or not this is just more bullshit about 9/11, diving into conspiracy theories, or if there's actually something new being revealed in this docuseries. Well, dear listener, there is definitely something new being revealed, and it actually is a plausible, if not credible, story about how the U.S. government, namely the CIA, negligently, if not grossly negligently, allowed the September 11th attacks to happen. I highly recommend that you watch the first episode of this series. It's 26 minutes long. It's not that big a time investment. But I can't advocate for you to watch that series without giving away some of the details. So if you think that you're going to watch that series and you want the entire thing to be a surprise, stop listening to this segment and shoot over to the next segment. That's the best I can do for, dear listener, spoiler alerts coming. I am old enough to remember, and I know most of you are old enough to remember, that in 1998, some no-name fuck that we had never heard of, and this group of terrorists out in the middle of Sudan or Yemen or somewhere blows up the building containing the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi in Africa. Some U.S. Embassy personnel, diplomatic personnel are killed. A bunch of Kenyans are killed. The entire building is destroyed and most of the block that it's on. It's a gruesome scene. Turns out that no-name fuck is Osama bin Laden, and that group of weirdos hiding out in the desert, that's Al-Qaeda. And as the fire alarms are going off in the U.S. alphabet soup security agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the CIA realizes that they're pretty much on point to have the intel on these people, and they don't have one source inside Al-Qaeda. To be clear, in 1998, the CIA had no sources inside Al-Qaeda and didn't know much about the organization. Well, given the fact that these people have just attacked a U.S. embassy, that had to change. I'm not going to go into all of the details because it's well worth watching the first part of this docuseries so that you can put all these pieces together. But fast forward a couple of years, in the year 2000, there are Saudi terrorists that are circulating through California, namely in San Diego. There are some on the East Coast as well. And these people are known to A, the CIA, and B, Saudi intelligence forces. And here's a big clue into how all of these agencies engage in bureaucratic and procedural and territorial fuckery, which ends up hurting the United States of America. At that time, the CIA was not allowed to spy domestically. Well, how are we going to get around that? The CIA would simply reach out to allies in other governments, use their security forces, and have their security forces come over to this country and spy on people on behalf of the CIA. This whole Jeffrey Epstein thing has brought out the tight relationship between the CIA and Mossad, Israelis' intelligence forces, their version of the CIA. So it is plausible, if not likely, that if the CIA wants to gather intelligence domestically on Saudis that it believes are terrorists and that have been now identified as terrorists, they're not going to go through the FBI because of, what did I just say, procedural fuckery, territorial fuckery. They want to keep the case for themselves. They can't build the case themselves, so they'll use an ally in a, what we'll call a sister agency. The version of the CIA in Saudi Arabia, I believe, is called the GID. They don't need 100 guys to come over to this country. They need one or two key assets to ingratiate themselves with the terrorists so they can spy on them. And why would they want to do that? Well, it turns out that the CIA came up with a plan back in 1998 that the best way to cultivate an intelligence asset within Al-Qaeda was to allow them to navigate the world, in particular, the United States of America. And while they are navigating the world, in particular, the United States of America, approach one or two of them to see if they can't be turned. Watch the docuseries, that first episode, to see how this was effectuated between the CIA, the consulate office in Saudi Arabia issuing these passports, the Saudi GID, and watch the movements of these guys pre-9/11. This attempt to turn these Saudi terrorists was kept from the 9/11 Commission. It was kept from congressional commissions. It was only in August of 2001. Now I want you to think about it. September 11th, 2001. It's only in August that the CIA sends a memo to the FBI and says, look, there's people in this country. Here are their names. We think that they're up to no good. We're not sure exactly what they're going to do, but we think they're going to do something, and we need to find them. The CIA had lost track of the very people that they intended to turn in order to cultivate assets into Al-Qaeda. They kept it a secret for as long as they could, and then they realized, look, if something goes down, if these guys do something, and it comes back that we were trying to cultivate them as assets, this is going to be the biggest clusterfuck in the history of the CIA. I watched this episode. I highly recommend again that you watch the episode. The pieces will come together in a much more coherent fashion. But it just made perfect sense. It made perfect sense. The CIA has egg on its face because there is a cell of terrorists out there that blow up the U.S. Embassy in Kenya, kill Americans. They have no real leads on this group. It's only after this incident that they realize they have no assets that can help them infiltrate the group. and they make it their mission, they're going to turn real assets. They're going to have human assets inside of that organization providing intelligence to the CIA. Given that most of these guys are Saudis, they go to their Saudi partners, the sister organization, the GID in Saudi Arabia. They come up with this plan. We're going to track these folks all over the world. You issue them the passports. If they need money, you continue to provide them money. We want them to at least feel safe enough that they can navigate the world. We can nab them in some part of the world. We'll catch them in some sort of crime. We will otherwise reach out to them, maybe bribe them, and turn at least one or two of them. So now we have live assets inside Al-Qaeda. And the whole thing blew up in their fucking face. All of you have careers. You've worked on certain types of teams. You've worked for certain divisions. You've worked for certain companies where there are people who are out over their skis, to use a euphemism. They are not nearly as qualified to do what they're doing as they think they are, and they've got ambition. And there's somebody breathing down their neck to get Project A done or Project B done. And they come up with some plan that on its face looks treacherous. This is destined to fail. Is the fate of a nation at stake? No. Would this project failing sink the company? Probably not. But you know from personal experience, dear listener, that when the project falls apart, it makes your life more difficult, and it generally impacts the trajectory of the career of the person that was leading that charge. I have only watched the first of what are going to be 5 episodes in this series, but the first episode presented to me not only the documentation to support this timeline of events, but this timeline of events itself makes sense in light of the events leading up to the September 11th attacks. You had people who were not nearly as smart as they thought they were, who were being lambasted for the fact that they allowed the attack in Kenya to happen in the first place. They have no human assets to determine what the hell Al-Qaeda is up to. This seems like your government at work. Bold, dangerous idea. Terrible execution, blows up in their face. They use the consequences of their own terrible actions to do what? Fail up. Increase their own power and their own control because of their own irresponsibility. Someone who is playing spy versus someone who's an actual spy. So, I'll give credit where credit is due. Yes, the U.S. government was in a way complicit in the September 11th attacks.
Act 2. Tennessee's secondary sucks.
I was going to do a breakdown piece of the Tennessee-Georgia game, and unfortunately Charlie Kirk was murdered. I felt compelled to address that, among some other things that were happening, and I just didn't get around to having a more thorough breakdown of the game. I'll sum it up because I'm not going to spend the same amount of time that I would have. Tennessee's offense against a Georgia defense that's one of the best in the nation and has been one of the best in the nation for the last 5 or 6 years, went up and down the field, scored points at will. Looked very poised and composed with their new quarterback, Aguilar. The defense, on the other hand, particularly the secondary, fucking sucked. Now, at the beginning of the game, some of the more astute of the listeners that frequent this podcast, that were watching that football game, viewers were notified over and over again that Tennessee's 2 starting cornerbacks were both hurt, and Tennessee had no other choice but to start 2 freshmen, although highly touted, highly recruited, 2 freshmen at cornerback in their 3rd game ever playing college football in Neyland Stadium against the University of Georgia. As a Tennessee Volunteer fan, I consoled myself by saying, okay, our defense may not be great, and we may be starting 2 freshman cornerbacks. They are supposed to be 5-star recruits, or at least one of them was. And this kid for Georgia, Stockton, well, Athens fan, they're not too confident in this kid. He hasn't looked the part since he took over, and there are some question marks about whether or not he could lead Georgia on the offensive side to an SEC championship game and potentially the college football playoff leading to the national championship. When a kid like that comes into Neyland Stadium, you have to, as a Tennessee Volunteer fan, feel good. It's 107,000 people. This kid's never played in front of a crowd like that. It's loud as hell. This is a highly anticipated game. He hasn't played that well. He hasn't demonstrated a command of the Georgia offense. So I'm thinking, yes, we may have problems at cornerback, and we may have problems generally on defense, but we're not dealing with one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. We're not dealing with someone who's even been a 4 or 5 year starter in the same offense. We're dealing with someone who has question marks over his head as to whether or not he can lead this team to where this team believes it can go. And by the end of the first half, it was clear our defense fucking sucks. I will give Georgia, I will give Kirby Smart all the credit in the world in order to gain confidence. They had Stockton go after these freshman cornerbacks practically immediately off the bat and not little in or out 5 or 6 yard throws. They had him going after these guys downfield. And it soon became clear these guys are not going to be able to cover, particularly man-to-man coverage, down the field. Say what you will about Tennessee driving down when the game was tied, taking a penalty on the last play of the game, having to kick a 42-yard field goal instead of a 37-yard field goal. The kicker missing that field goal like he had lumps of coal in his asshole trying to turn them into diamonds. None of that is incorrect. Tennessee had a chance to win the game in regulation. They blew it. But that game demonstrated to me that Tennessee is going to struggle on defense all year. Now, fast forward the next week, that's last Saturday, Tennessee plays UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham. This is a game that Tennessee should win by 40 or 50 points. And Tennessee goes out and the offense puts up the points that you would expect it to. Surprisingly, UAB scores, I believe, 24 points. And I don't believe that all those points were scored in garbage time after the game was so far out of control that UAB had put in their second string and the University of Tennessee had put in their second string. Even if that were the case, I would expect the University of Tennessee Volunteer second string defense to slow, if not stop, the second string University of Alabama Birmingham offense. This was not the case. There is no more insecure feeling as a football fan, whether it's college, pro, than when your defense sucks. You know they can't stop people, and your offense has to carry the burden. Tennessee's offense gave Tennessee a chance to win, being up 8 with 2 minutes left or whatever it was in the game. Georgia drove right down the field, scored a touchdown, got the 2-point conversion. I'd like to believe that in a Nick Saban-esque way, those cornerbacks, although freshmen, are going to get better every single game so that Tennessee's defense, particularly their secondary, particularly their pass defense, will tighten up over the course of a season and will make Tennessee fan proud. The first opportunity to demonstrate whether or not this fantasy can become a reality, the University of Tennessee Volunteers go to Mississippi State. The Mississippi State Bulldogs host the Vols this Saturday, a Mississippi State team that won exactly 0 SEC games last year. Some people have a hard-on for Mississippi State now. They hosted Arizona State, a ranked team, and were able to win that game. But I don't know if that speaks more to the fact that Arizona State isn't nearly the team that it was last year than it does that Mississippi State is head and shoulders above where they were last year. Going on the road against any SEC opponent, it's not easy. But if you're going on the road against an SEC opponent that didn't win a football game against an SEC team last year, and you're struggling this much on defense, this is the opportunity to stand up and to have that kind of game that can propel you into being who you think you are as a 4 or 5 star recruit at cornerback or safety. Vols defense, it's time to put up or shut up. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.